Welcome to CISO Insider, Nightfall's chat with Chief Information Security Officers. We host CISOs from different industries to discuss their pathways to the role, the challenges they face in their everyday work, and lessons they can share with anyone aspiring to become a CISO. This podcast brings you into the world of cybersecurity and gives you a window into the most brilliant minds in the business. I'm Chris Martinez. Today on CISO Insider, it's our Season 2 premiere with Mitch Zahler, the CISO of youve Financial. Mitch shares why concise communication is essential for security leaders, how he gives back to the community through teaching and consulting work, plus a great story on the first CISO and how the security role evolved to become part of the C-suite. And those are only a few of the incredible insights Mitch has to share with us today. Please join us in welcoming Mitch to CISO Insider. All right. Thank you so much, Mitch, for joining us on the CISO Insider podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So what attracted you to get into cybersecurity and work in financial services?
Well, I'm not sure you could use the word attracted, but maybe more like being at the right place at the right time. But when I started my IT career, I was in the financial services arena. At that point, there was only mainframe security, as local area networks that connected to desktops were really in their infancy. At that time, I worked for American Express, and we were bringing in this new technology which needed to be installed as new infrastructure. Once we installed it, they asked for a volunteer to run the security portion of the newly installed Novell network. Since I was fairly new to the group and there was no one who had time to do it, I was volunteered by my boss, which at the time didn't seem like a great thing. But it was probably one of the best things he could have done for me, and I haven't looked back since. Those early days in security gave me the opportunity that aren't so available today, being with 10 people who met with the architects of Novell twice a year in Texas, and we gave them suggestions about how we can improve their security offerings. It's really exciting to see some of the enhancements that I suggested actually were incorporated into the operating system.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Did you have a mentor as you were building your career path as a security leader?
Yeah, I had quite a few. Since the world of data security, as it was called back then, was very small, I was speaking and interacting with people like Steve Katz, who I've stayed in touch with after all these years. Steve, for those listeners who don't know, was the first CISO. So I had and still have a connection with him. His insights into various security ideas stayed with me until today, and I apply many of the things that we spoke about over those past years. I would have lunch with Steve, and we'd discuss where I was going in my career, and he would give me advice. And I probably couldn't get that kind of advice from anybody else in the field because Steve had pretty much the most experience, again, being the first CISO. I also used to speak at conferences with people like, believe it or not, John McAfee and other security leaders who were trying to launch their security products. It was an amazing time in the industry, and I learned a lot from these people in the early days as well. But I think the one person that really changed my thinking about security and mentored me quite a bit was my boss at a place I used to work at, Republic National Bank. He taught me that I needed to make sure that any controls I put in place were as transparent as possible for the user. He used to tell me if they weren't, then people would try to bypass them, and then security wouldn't work. He told me also that you can't slow down the business, and we need to find a way to implement security controls in a smart and effective way. He gave me that advice a long time ago, and I still practice it. So here's a cute story which illustrates that. When I worked at one of the banks, we had to assure that the trading desk computers were secure since they interface with quite a few systems in the bank, internally and externally. There were about 10 machines where trades were executed, and they needed to be extremely fast for various reasons. Those machines, however, couldn't have antivirus on them because antivirus, as you know, slows them down. But they did have a few games on them so the brokers or the traders could, quote, relax during the day. And anybody who's worked with traders know that traders usually get anything they need. So we had a dilemma. How do we protect the machines from viruses and allow these games on the system? So we came up with a control process where we tested and scanned those games on other workstations to assure the new versions were safe, and we had strict controls over those traders' workstations, so no one else could put anything on them. We also limited where they could go externally. We didn't want them going to certain sites, but they only needed to go to a handful of sites, and that's what we did. So we let the business run while putting in controls to protect the organization.
Great. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you meant by the first CISO?
Sure. So Steve Katz was working for a company, Citibank at that time had been hit by a Russian hacker. and people were pulling their money out of Citibank. Again, this is many, many years ago. They were pulling their money out of Citibank because they thought that their money was going to be stolen by this hacker. Steve Katz came into the organization, and he really became the first chief information security officer, which started dealing directly with the C-suite. So before Steve, the security people didn't have a seat up in the executive row. But now that Steve came in, they changed the whole model. So Steve would actually be there and be like the first CISO who would actually be able to talk to all the other C-suite people, advise them what the risks are, and then tell them how to mitigate the risks. And that's really how the whole CISO project started.
Awesome. That is so cool that you were involved in that. Okay. Can you tell us about writing for publications like CISO Online and Bank Info Security, like how you got started, your writing process, and anything else you'd like to share?
Sure. Well, I believe that clear and concise communication is really essential for any person in security. That's something that you need to have. You need to have your listeners and or readers understand threats and how they can reduce or mitigate their risk totally. So I've been working on my entire career trying to enhance my speaking, enhance my writing. And I was once meeting with a friend of mine. His name is Ben Rothke. And Ben writes a lot for a publication. He reviews a lot of books. And we were talking. He suggested that I start writing for security publications. While I don't get to write articles as much as I like, I try to pen articles that have something that I feel very strongly about. So around tax time, I usually write about tax fraud, since I want to educate people how fraud may be perpetrated on them. It gives me personal satisfaction to know that I may have saved someone thousands of dollars of their hard-earned money. And again, I also try to focus on the community or town publications and get down to really the grassroots where I can reach people from all walks of life so that I can give them some useful information, even though security is probably the furthest thing from their mind. Also, when I speak at conferences, I always want to give the attendees something that they can take back with them that they could actually use that will make a difference. I remember speaking a few years ago at a financial crimes conference and I usually try to do anywhere between 3 and 5 tips and tricks that I have learned throughout my career. I tried giving those to the audience. And I told the audience they should go back and try it and see what happens. And they might be surprised with what they find out. So about 2 weeks later, I received an email from an attendee who wrote to thank me for the tips. She said that she was amazed at what she found when she applied those tips and tricks, and that she actually brought it to management. And they were very pleased with her results and actually acted on them, which is great. That means they saw a security gap, and they actually gave her the ability to act on those security gaps. So it was also very nice that she took the time to email me, and I appreciate it.
That's great. I'm so glad that you're able to really connect with people like that. How did you get into teaching at Rutgers, and what's it like working as a professor and a CISO at the same time?
So I've always been a big believer in giving back to the community, and I've done so throughout my career by mentoring and providing sometimes gratis security consulting in special situations, just to name a few things. Teaching while having a full-time position isn't easy, but I still wanted to continue my path of giving. So a colleague that I met a few years ago at a meeting told me that she teaches part-time at Rutgers, and they were looking for an adjunct professor to teach information security. She thought I would be great for the fit. Initially, I didn't know how I'd be able to juggle it. But after the first few semesters, I have it to the point where I can do both without any concern that either my day job or teaching will be impacted. I usually try to dedicate one class a semester where I explain the various domains of information security to my students and what it takes to get a job in those areas. I also bring real life examples from organizations I've worked at into the classroom, which I think is really important. And many times I've explained to my students current hacks that were reported in the news, because invariably we'd always have something that happened during the semester. This company got hacked, this company had a breach, whatever it was. It always happens at least once during the semester. So we'd actually be able to take that and start dissecting it a little bit. I remember when I first started teaching at Rutgers, I asked those who were going to graduate what their next steps were. And most of them said that they weren't sure, since they learned a lot of theory but not enough practical hands-on skill. So at that point, I decided to add a Splunk lab to the syllabus. I have this great engineer, David Wiedesek from Splunk, he's great. He drove down from Boston every semester to run the lab. Of course, now we do it by Zoom. But the best part is that the students get a certificate for basic Splunk skills, which they can now put on their resume. And I did have 2 people who actually sent me an email, and they said, thanks for the lab. I put it on my resume. I actually got an interview, and I'm starting to work low level in a SOC. So again, really gratifying. Also, I find it very satisfying when my former students contact me and ask for advice. This may help them get their first security position. So if I find out they actually did get their job, again, they'll send me something through LinkedIn, which is really fantastic. And hopefully I hit some small part of getting them there. I have one former student who now works for the FBI cyber division. Because what I used to do in class before the pandemic was I used to have the FBI come into class and give a lecture on what it's like to work within the FBI. And this student went and talked to this person, got his card, and it progressed where the student now is actually working for the FBI cyber division. Another former student recently reached out to me, and I helped him with some tips on his upcoming interview at Google. So there are many others who have gone on to obtain security jobs since I started teaching. And I think at the end of the day, this is where I get a lot of satisfaction from in teaching. And just to close this part out, there's always two main things that I teach my students. Again, there are many things you need in security, but the two main things I always teach them is they must have a passion for security and they have to think outside of the box.
Definitely. Over your career, you've worked in financial services and fintech with some huge companies like HSBC and American Express, and then some small firms where you worked with small and medium-sized businesses. So are there any lessons and common threads that apply to working for the big and small companies?
Well, off the bat, large organizations have much more red tape, which is expected. They're huge. So the consequences of that is that some things progress slower, but they have funds to implement many more security controls in a given year because they have a larger attack surface. Small organizations, on the other hand, many times don't have the ability to implement their controls as quickly as the big organizations. They can do it faster, but they lack the security funding. So while SMBs may get things done faster, you need to carefully identify your risks and address them in a hierarchical fashion. One of the things I also learned is you need buy-in. You need in both types of organizations really a clear, concise description of the risks and why you rate them in a particular way. And most importantly, to let the business and C-suite be involved in the decision-making process of remediating those risks. After all, they're the ones that ultimately decide on your funding and accepting risk for the organization. And one of the things that I found, which is totally amazing to me, is when you do get the business and C-suite involved, they take an ownership in it. When they take an ownership in it, first of all, you get their point of view, which is great, but they're also more apt to give you the funding and anything that you need for that. So I thought that was great. Over the years, I've been asked to present security budgets to executive management, and I've noticed there are some who truly understand the risk to their business, while others really don't have really any idea. And I've always seen my job as twofold. One is to educate the audience so they understand the risks, and two, to explain in layman terms how you propose to remediate those risks. And if you don't put it in layman's terms, you have it in all of these security terms, it's going to totally go over their head and they're not going to be able to work with you. Also, due to regulatory issues, some of the people who now sit in the boardroom and executives can be held responsible for security incidents. That usually gets people up and listening when you present. One thing that is present in both large and small organizations is reading about a security incident in another company. If it makes its way all the way to the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, the next morning you're going to get a call. Hey, are we okay with this? I find that when senior people perk up and ask, what type of protections do we have against that attack that happened to this other company, it actually results in getting sometimes more security budget and actually sometimes more security people within the organization, which is a good thing. In my book, again, we don't want the other people to get hit, but since it did happen, it's a way that a lot of other companies can actually get benefits out of it.
So when you think about security in your role as security leader at Even Financial, what are the most important things for your organization and what have you learned along the way?
So for people who aren't familiar with us, Even Financial's mission has always been to build the definitive search, comparison, and recommendation engine for financial services. I work with very talented people who are always collaborating with each other across the entire organization and actually have thought about security. The innovation I see in different areas is fantastic. And along with that innovation, we may need to put in new security controls that have to be integrated with our new products. So one of the reasons I'm here at Even Financial is to make sure security is integrated into those new innovative products because we want to keep them secure. It's interesting. The culture in many startups is to move ahead quickly, really as quickly as possible, without necessarily thinking about security. But one of the things I've noticed is more people reaching out to me to ask security questions, engaging security to work with them. So I believe this is a result of a culture shift, which comes from security awareness and education, which actually does a tremendous amount in all organizations. One of my goals is to have people think about security when they either see something or at maybe an incident or when they're developing a new product, because no one wants to be breached. And those mid-sized companies that may have hard times regaining their reputation and winning back their customer base. For our organization, we place special emphasis on the protection of customer information. To this end, we have a SOC 2 and are constantly working on new ways to protect the organization. We place multiple levels of security controls within our systems to protect our customers' data. And each employee is aware that it's extremely important to do so. So I look at security the same way, no matter the size or vertical of the organization, which is in. Of course, threats are different, but at the end of the day, the basic principles of security are still the same. And controls need to be created and implemented as they relate to the data that you're protecting in your environment.
So, what resources do you use to keep your knowledge of the industry and security fresh? Anything like newsletters, conferences, and other resources that you can recommend to our listeners?
This is something that's really difficult to do, but like, many in the field, I need to keep up with new issues facing the security community. But I really don't have a lot of time to read hundreds of articles. And believe me, there are lots of articles that come out every day on this. So some of the articles I read are often on a magazine called Doc Reading, Bleepy Computer, and some other security-focused magazines. The main thing that I do really, though, is I keep up by belonging to multiple groups that have various public and private newsletters. The ones I use are pretty much private, unfortunately, because I have built relationships over my career. But a company like Team Cymru, which is spelled CYMRU, so there's cymru.org, they have a service that puts out daily digests of important information security links to articles that you can click on and read. So you can just choose what you want. You look at the subject line, hey, this interests me, and you could actually go to that article and read it. They also give you a little synopsis, which is really helpful. I think each person will need to search the internet and see what is right for them. They also need to make sure that they know what the source of the article is to assure reliability. There are a lot of people out there who put out articles and they're, how do I say this nicely? They're something that people shouldn't rely on. Okay, so you need to understand what the source is. If someone in a specific vertical, such as, let's say, healthcare, okay, so there are organizations such as High Trust, okay, which send out newsletters and hold webinars on various security topics for the healthcare industry. Even though they sell a service, they still put out newsletters and they will have webinars. Your vendors for your hardware as well. Your firewall vendor will usually have seminars. Okay, so make sure you go to those and you sign up for their newsletters. There's a lot of good information there. I would also suggest that if you're in an industry that has an ISAC, which stands for Information Sharing and Analysis Center, you join that if you possibly can. There are over 20 ISACs for various industries like automotive, real estate, oil and gas, healthcare, and of course, financial. And again, they have a lot of great information that comes out of those different ISACs that will actually deal directly with your vertical. And it may save you a lot of time reading. Also, if you belong to ISACA or ISC Square, you should make sure you sign up for newsletters and visit the sites regularly. Again, you don't have to read everything, but you can search. Now you have articles coming from these two, at least, reputable firms that deal with security. That's all they do. I mean, ISACA does more than security, but it's focused on security as well. And they have two firms now that you can go get their newsletters and see what's going on. What do they think is important? Let me see what they think is important. What's going on? I would also search the internet for security lists and blogs, which people rate highly. Okay, so you got to be very wary until you actually check them out for yourself. If there's a lot of people on there, and again, to try to find bots is difficult. But if you know anybody on the list, you could ask them as well. What do you think of this? And there are currently a lot of virtual conferences that are free since there's no physical venue because of COVID. So take advantage of those. Again, choosing those that align with your organization. There's a lot of information you can use. And again, what I try to do is the ones that I need to listen to or I want to listen to, I'll actually put them on and I'll work. And when I hear something that I need to listen to, I'll stop working and listen to what they're saying. So I'm I'm not just sitting there for 3 hours listening to it. So again, everybody can do it at their own pace, but that's something that I do. So finally, I would also make sure you keep up with the news about your specific business sector. Remember that the CISO is also a proponent for business units, okay, within their organizations, and has to understand not only about security, but also about the business that they're in.
Awesome. Those are some fantastic resources for our listeners. So thank you so much for sharing those.
Sure.
What are some of the unique challenges of working as a security leader in fintech and financial services, especially managing partnerships with other financial institutions?
Coming from the world of big banks, most of my career, I understand my peers in those institutions and how they operate and practice security. When you're in a fintech, the culture is usually very different compared to large institutions. So I would advise those in fintechs, if they haven't, done any work in large corporations, to listen and to forge relationships with your security peers in those larger organizations. And keep in mind that they may operate in different ways, but we all have the same end goal, and everybody usually works really well together. I truly believe that each side can learn from each other, whether it be about business or security. Also remember that you not only need to deal with security, but you need to be an advocate for the business, as I said before. So the role of the CISO has matured in many organizations to where you're a member of the business team as well. So understanding your business and that of the institution you're partnering with is important for a win-win outcome. But finally, some people may be intimidated by the largest security teams that big financials have. Don't be. Again, try to forge a partnership with those teams. You'd be surprised how many of the same issues they share with fintechs. Again, there are things that are different, but there's a lot of things that are the same.
Definitely. So we've been working and living through COVID for a year now. Can you share your perspectives and thoughts on how the pandemic response has impacted the financial and security industries?
Wow. I think that's a topic that could probably, you could do an entire podcast within itself on. So, but let me give you a few of my observations. For the most part, I believe most people rose to the occasion. And in many organizations, we have a remote workforce that will probably remain remote. And the security teams that help them get to this point will have to continue to innovate and make remote work the new normal, even after the pandemic winds down. I've also spoken to peers and have placed them in two groups, although I'm sure there are more, but this is, on first glance, what I placed them into. The first one are those that are heavily cloud-based when this began last year, and the second is those that were still on land and on-premises systems. Each has their own unique challenges, but those that had their employees using cloud-based systems, let's say for mail, instant messaging, and file storage, didn't have to make as many tweaks since they already had built security into their model and weren't that dependent on a lot of local infrastructure that was in the office. Most of it just needed to be they needed high-speed access for their people, maybe some local controls like firewalls and multi-factor authentication, those types of things. But those that depended on local infrastructure for their employees, they had a local area network, let's say in the office, had much more to do to assure that their employees could safely work remotely. In many organizations, I'm sure, security and IT personnel didn't sleep much those first few weeks as they had to build out more remote services and they had to make sure that they were secure. I'm sure some security vendors like those that produce MFAs, multi-factor authentication, enjoyed increased sales during this period.
Definitely. What's one thing that you know now that you wish you'd known earlier in your career?
Good question. Well, as I stated before, earlier in my career, I didn't factor enough of the business's view into my security recommendations. I remember early on in my career when IT ran the business as opposed to the other way around. We called it the tail wagging the dog. And I thought technology was supposed to tell the business what they would be developing and the business would adapt. If I would have known how to better integrate with the business units that I supported, I think I probably would have had a lot less stress and probably moved security initiatives along further and faster.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And what should aspiring CISOs and security leaders look for in a mentor?
So I think initially you need someone who's passionate about what they do, okay? A person who's passionate about security. You also want someone who's known to be a creative thinker in the field. So there are people that have multiple jobs in security and those that just had one. I remember growing up in this field that I was always tasked with like 3 or 4 jobs, and I used to say, this is just too much. But what it taught me was I got to be in every single department within information security. So I knew what happened in each one. So I was able to be more creative because I knew how all of the different parts worked. And I think if you can find somebody like that, that's the person you're looking for in a mentor. You also want to have somebody, I think, who's been in the front lines of security for more than 10 years. And the reason for that is, when you do something for a while, you see things that aren't in textbooks. And there's a lot of security that those of us who've been in the field for a while have seen. There may not even be articles on it. So it's just really word of mouth to anybody that I speak to. I'll say, hey, we saw this, and this is what we did. And then nobody may even ever know about it until it happens to somebody else. So I think that's important. Also, someone who's willing to take time with you because they truly want to give you advice based on their experiences. Some people say, yeah, I'll mentor you, and you'll speak to them maybe once a year. Okay, you want to have somebody who's actually going to be there to talk to you. So when you call them, they may not be able to take the call right away, but they'll get back to you and they'll make the time because they really want to mentor you. Also, someone who will be honest with you. You don't want a mentor who's going to agree with you when they think that what you're saying is incorrect. You want somebody who's going to say, I hear what you're saying, but did you think about this? And then work out the problem with the mentor. The mentor doesn't have to be correct 100% of the time, just like you don't have to be correct 100% of the time. But you do want somebody that is going to be honest with you, because in the long run, you need to know if what you're saying, if the theories that you have or the things that you're telling the person are actually true, or they're based on something that this person can just, get into right away and say, no, this can't stand. So you want somebody who's going to be honest. And finally, you want somebody who can introduce you to other security professionals that may help you in your career. So we all have networks on LinkedIn, but wouldn't it be great to have one of the, big security CISOs who's mentoring you say, hey, you know what? I know you want to get into this. I have a friend over at X company, and I know they're increasing their staff. Would you like me to pass your resume over to them? I mean, that's great because they have a foot in the door. So that's something I think that you want to look for in a mentor as well.
We're going to take a brief break, then get back to more questions with Mitch Zahler from Even Financial. You're listening to CISO Insider from Nightfall AI.
Nightfall DLP is the industry's first cloud-native data loss prevention solution designed for high-growth companies securing sensitive data across cloud apps like Slack, GitHub, and Google Drive. Traditional data security solutions are painful to implement, require heavy overhead, and have high false positive rates. Nightfall customers are up and running in minutes with our library of machine learning detectors to protect PII, PHI, and other industry-specific data. Our developer-centric platform allows security teams to configure content inspection as code for customizable data protection. Learn more at cisoinsider.com/nightfallai.
Now, the next set of questions is our lightning round, and these can be rapid-fire answers or pretty much as much as you want to talk about them. In your opinion, what is the biggest challenges CISOs will face in 2021?
Tough question. There's so many. I think securing the new perimeter, which is no longer just in the office, but anywhere really in the world where you have your remote employees working, which in turn increases the attack surface, which means that if you have people working in foreign countries now, there may be, some countries that are intercepting data, which means you may have to have everything encrypted. So a lot of things change when we're now dealing with a new perimeter. I think also increased sophisticated attacks, including which I believe may be residual compromises from the SolarWinds hack, and of course the ever-continuing ransomware attacks. I think supply chain risks have been there for a while, but people aren't. In my personal opinion, we need to pay more attention to supply chain risks. And I think one of the toughest ones that we're having, it may not be a security per se, but acquiring and retaining solid security talent is going to be another challenge for 2021.
Definitely. What makes you get out of bed every day as a security leader?
I guess it's the excitement of not knowing what issues the day will bring. You could plan your day, but many times you get pulled into something that you didn't plan for. It can range from newly discovered gaps near the controls all the way up to a security incident. I probably could count on two hands when I went into the office planning to do something and I actually got it done, because things just don't happen like that in security. It's always moving. Discovering new areas where we could also strengthen our controls and thereby reinforce our overall security posture is another reason to get up. It's great. Again, talk about the passion. We love doing this. And sometimes it can be an aha moment, which is very satisfying. So those are the things I think that get me up at a bit every day.
What's one key lesson you've learned over time as a CISO role and cybersecurity has evolved?
I'd say the biggest thing that I've learned is make sure that executive management understands what the risks to the organization are and that you articulate solutions in a clear and concise manner. That's all I would say. I mean, I think that's really, really, really important.
I love it. It's succinct and it's right to the point.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What's your proudest moment as an InfoSec executive?
Unfortunately, many of the things I'm most proud of can't be publicly divulged. But I'll tell you the following story, which made myself and my team very proud. So we had an employee in an organization I used to work for that was actually being stalked via our corporate email system.
Oh my God.
The employee was extremely frightened due to the nature of the text within the emails. And I directed the staff to launch an internal investigation, and we worked with law enforcement, and eventually the person was arrested. The employee's whole demeanor changed, once this person was put in jail, and they were so thankful to our group, which due to the circumstances of the case made us spend quite a few days working on it. While we didn't stop anything like a big hack on our systems that day, we did give an employee back their life. And I truly believe that. She was so ecstatic. That was rewarding, and I was proud of the team. And again, it's about using our own experience, I think, to protect and give back.
I'm so glad that you were there for her. Hearing that, really touched me in my heart. So that's amazing. Good work.
Yeah.
What would you say is the most important article that you've published as a contributor to CISO Online or the other outlets you write for?
That's an interesting question. So there are many security practitioners that write articles, for our peers, which entail many, great security topics. I like to focus a portion of my career on the first canon for my SACA, which says, protect society, the common good, necessary, public trust and confidence, and the infrastructure. So to that end, many years around tax time, I publish articles about tax fraud and how to protect against it from a cybersecurity point of view. One of the biggest challenges is conveying to non-technical terms how scammers and hackers steal millions from unsuspecting Americans each year, especially the elderly. And again, I've known two people that this happened to. It really upset me tremendously. So I started, putting these articles out. The article always includes tips, can save someone's life saving or just heartache knowing that they lost money. I also wrote an article for CISO magazine that was titled Volunteer Your Services, Not Your Personal Information, which actually came out, again, about another true story that happened to me. I helped a nonprofit who had their database of volunteers hacked. Of course, there was PII, personal identifiable information, in that database, and the volunteers weren't too happy it was stolen. The article tells a story and then gives practical tips to those, volunteers that want to volunteer their services to worthy causes. And it's interesting, I had someone from the InfoSec community say he sent it to a few of his relatives who do volunteer work many times a year, and they implement some of the tips I wrote about. So again, I love doing that stuff.
That's wonderful that your writing can be so impactful and help so many people.
Yes, that's one of the things that I aim for, to give back to the community.
Excellent. Well said. Is there anything else you want to mention or share with our listeners?
Again, I think, in the overall scheme of things, it's important to, move your career forward. It's important for you to learn new security, learning new techniques every day, learning more about security every day. But just remember that why we're in this, okay? We're in this to protect. And not only do we protect our organizations, we're also going to protect our fellow man. If there's something that we can do to decrease some kind of spamming, some kind of phishing, or whatever, even though we're not compensated for it, it behooves us to take care and help other people with the tools that we've learned and the things that we've been given over our careers.
All right. So, Mitch, this has been such an incredible interview. Thank you so much for taking time out to speak with us, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks for listening to CISO Insider, a podcast created and sponsored by Nightfall AI, the industry's first cloud-native data loss prevention solution. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts. The ratings and reviews help more people find us. Special thanks to Wendell Topper for podcast production support. Learn more about Wendell's work at www.createch.us. That's CREATEK.us. Follow Nightfall on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Nightfall AI. That's Nightfall AI, and email us at marketing@nightfall.ai with questions, feedback, and suggestions about CISO Insider, including suggestions for CISOs you'd like to hear from. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you again next time.